That's right. I was asking him about the fundamental Christian position. And I asked him basically, well, what if they're right, in essence, about these topics? Would you then believe what they believe? And he was like, never. I would never believe that. It's not that they disagree with Christianity. What I found in my research is they were disgusted with
Mm.
Christianity.
Friends, what do the movements of progressive Christianity, the prosperity gospel, the seeker sensitive movement, the self help movement, Christian Science, and the current cultural push toward finding your true authentic self, what do these all have in common? Well, what they have in common is that they can be traced back to and are heavily influenced by something called New Thought. This is a movement that is little known about, but widely practiced. And we're going to be talking today with Melissa Dougherty, who has just written an absolutely groundbreaking book on this topic called Happy Lies. In fact, this was so little used, this term, that even Melissa didn't realize that she came out of New Thought until she started studying it. She always considered herself an ex-New Ager, but New Age and New Thought are actually two totally different things. With New Age, you have things more like crystal energy, Reiki, all sorts of outside stuff like zodiac, horoscope, tarot cards, whereas New Thought really has a lot to do with this idea that the self is divine and that you, through the power of your thinking, can actually change things in reality. And it's informed so many of the errors that we see coming into our culture and coming into our churches. So I'm very excited to bring that conversation to you in just a moment. But I want to tell you about a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to make a bit of a correction. So for those of you who watched last week's podcast where I addressed 7 dangerous ideas that are invading the church, I mentioned how there was a conference called the Joy and Justice Conference that had some false teachers platformed in that, and that it was sponsored by Our Daily Bread, which is that ministry that puts out those pamphlets with scripture passages. I remember having these when I was a young person. So apparently when this was all going down, a pastor wrote into Our Daily Bread and asked him for some clarity on why they would be sponsoring such an event. And they responded to him and let him know that they actually had not agreed to sponsor the event, that the event was advertised as being sponsored on the event's website, unbeknownst to them. So they didn't know about that. They were listed as sponsors. All they had done was agree to provide materials for the attendees of the conference. And so I had referenced the post from Center for Biblical Unity. They had also posted an update post that I had not seen that I think has some really important insights to it. So I wanted to make that correction that Our Daily Bread actually did not ever agree to sponsor that conference. They weren't aware that they were listed as a sponsor. And they actually did even express that they were going to try to do better in vetting speakers and things like that. So Center for Biblical Unity had some very good questions to ask. And I think this is generally good to ask of any organization that's going to be in unity with other organizations about the vetting, some great questions that can be answered, and maybe some unanswered questions, because while Our Daily Bread did articulate that they hold to what they call a biblical sexual ethic, as we've talked about on the podcast before, that's a very broad thing, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the worldview is biblical. Now I have all confidence that it probably is, but it's always good to keep asking more questions, like some specific questions that Center for Biblical Unity suggested is and this is kind of good for any organization, what's their position on LGBT issues in particular? Why was the name listed on the website? How did it happen? Have they established new processes to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? And then a really important question is, how did they explain the quote unquote voices arm of Our Daily Bread, or its content and platforming of speakers who promote liberation theology and anti-racism, which is sort of that word that encompasses everything that is the downflow of critical race theory. So Center for Biblical Unity said, we want them to have a strong legacy of biblical fidelity that endures for generations. But as we've talked about, when we're not vigilant in identifying these ideas and rooting them out, the drift will naturally go progressive. So again, I wanted to make that correction because they have not indeed agreed to sponsor, according to this email that they sent back to this pastor. But the broader point really still stands. I think even this is indicative of how the point I was making about how social justice and the whole big EVA structures sort of coalesce together to muddy the waters and water things down. And I think that even though there was that kind of misunderstanding, this is still the practical result of those dangerous ideas sort of mixing together. But I did want to make that correction. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that we are bringing our Unshaken Conference back for 2025 with 4 new dates and an entirely new theme. So our Unshaken Conference is a conference that I put on with Natasha Crane and Frank Turek, and we have had so much fun going to different places across the United States. And our first theme was the battle of the gods. Like, who is the God that you're going to bow your knee to? Is it the God of critical race theory? Is it the God of deconstruction? Is it the God of progressiveness? And we talked about some of these topics that a lot of people kind of shy away from. They don't really want to talk about. Well, we're going to continue in the spirit of that with our new theme, which is called Exposing the Darkness, a call to shine the light of truth. And our theme verse comes from Ephesians 5:11, which says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." So we have all new talks. We're going to be doing lots of shorter TED style talks, and we're going to do Q&As. We're going to be hanging out with you guys and getting to meet you face to face. So excited about that. I want to tell you about the events and where we're going to be and when, because you can right now go to unshakenconference.com to register for these events and get tickets. We'd love to see you come out. April 5th, we're going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico at one of my favorite churches in the country, which is Calvary Chapel. And that is one of my favorite pastors, Skip Heitzig. So excited to be coming to Albuquerque. Again, that's April 5th. And then we're going to be coming to Honolulu. Now, we always joke about how, somebody's got to do it, right? Somebody's got to go to Hawaii. But in reality, one of the reasons we really wanted to bring the Unshaken Conference to Hawaii is because I've been there and I have friends that live in Hawaii, and I know how progressive the culture and even the church culture in Hawaii has been. I know that believers in Hawaii have a lot of challenges. So on May 3rd, we're going to be in Honolulu at, I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong, but Waialae Baptist Church in Honolulu. So excited for that. May 5th. October 25th, we're going to be back in Southern California at Calvary Chapel South OC in San Clemente, October 25th. And then finally in November 8th, we're going to be at Stonebriar Community Church in Dallas. This one's really exciting because we've been wanting to come to Dallas for 2 years, and we finally made it happen. So excited. Go to unshakenconference.com to register for any of those events. We'd love to see you come out for those. All right, I'm going to take you right to our discussion about New Thought. Well, I'm so excited for today's interview. This is a conversation I've been waiting such a long time for because the subject matter is so important, and also because I've read this book that's coming out, and you all have to get this book. So if you're wondering who my guest is today, I have a special introduction. It's the author of Happy Little Lies, Melissa Dougherty.
This is take 3, and I just want to know who gave you the soundboard. Who
The
did
soundboard.
that? Yes.
Sorry, I could hardly hear you over the people's uproarious applause. They were so excited that you're here.
I'll take autographs later. It's okay. It's all right, everybody. You just gotta beat them off with a stick.
That's right, that's right. My husband, Mike, my tech support installed the little sound effects. I've got several. I've got little buttons that have music on them. I've never used the drum roll, though, so this is just special for you. You get the drum
That's
roll.
nice. I think the red carpet, should be an implementation next time. I think that would
Oh.
really it would bring it all home. Yeah.
I'm sorry I failed you. Next
Thank
time.
you.
Next
You
time.
can make it up to me by sending me anything in chocolate.
Oh,
Eh
okay. All
Mhm.
right, sounds
Appreciate it.
good.
Mhm.
Well, okay, so we're friends, so we're we have to get to business here. But, I have told you this, but this book was really, really insightful and eye-opening for me. So
Mm.
and I think I told you this too, it's like a lot of people write books, and then other people pour just blood, sweat, and tears into books, and you can tell the difference. And I started reading Happy Lies, and I was like, "Oh, she's going in on this. Like this, she is not phoning this one in. This is like," and I learned so much. So maybe let's start because I know, like years ago, I was telling you you should write a book, and you kind of didn't seem interested. And here you are with this masterpiece. What happened? How'd this happen?
Mm. It's so funny you mentioned this because it was in your I think it was in your live stream for, uh Live Your Truth and Other Lies, and somebody commented randomly, "Oh, when are you writing a book, Melissa?" I'm like, "Never." This is
Yeah.
not appealing to me, and in fact, in my announcement video about the book, I was like, I said I'd never do this. But it was not something I wanted to set out to do because a lot of people dream about writing books or let's just say it how it is. Sometimes it can be a cash grab for some people. That was not me in this situation. I see the hard work that most authors, that really put into what it takes to write a book. It's not easy. And it takes a significant amount of your time, especially if it's a new topic. And I joke and say, I'm like, "Yeah, I kinda lost my mind over writing this book," because I did. I put in everything. This was the hardest thing I've ever done. I put
Wow.
in so much work, so many hours. The research, I did my absolute best to present everything in this book to with integrity, with love and firmness, but also, to steel man this set of beliefs that not too many people know about. And so most of my source material is new thought material from new thought authors and books because they're out there. Nobody buys them, but I mean they're out there. Nobody, sees them so much on the bookshelves and stuff. But the ideas are everywhere. And that what happened was is that I had a break from seminary, Southern Evangelical, both you and I go there. It's a wonderful seminary,
Mhm.
and when you have that part of your brain back, you start thinking, "What are things that I've kinda put aside that I wanna pick up again and start doing?" And for me, it was reading a lot of books, wonderful books that I hadn't really been able to read, like, Carl Trueman's Strange New World, Marsha's book, there's so many, I could go down the list, but in reading them, I started realizing something. I'm like, all right, there's a undeniable thread here that I need to figure out. There's a code here I need to crack because my background, I've always explained myself as an ex New Ager. But more accurately, I am an ex New Thoughter. For years, since the inception of ministry for me in 2011, I just thought that everything was under anything weird was under the New Age umbrella.
Yeah.
Okay, I just thought, okay, if it's weird, if it's occultic, all right, it's all just new age. I'm an ex-new ager. But I could not help but think there's a divide here. When people come and ask me for advice about the spiritual beliefs they had been in, I'm like, I don't have anything for you. I don't know what Reiki is. I don't even know what
Yeah.
that yoga would be considered new age. There's this whole list of things that I'd never dabbled in, but the things that I was in were more of what I would have called metaphysical, like a higher spiritual Christianity, if you will, a better Christianity, something that was more, I suppose, pragmatic, but seemed way more spiritual. I thought these things were Christian and they seemed really enticing, very powerful, very spiritual, and it seemed very biblical. But this other thing, New Age, they wouldn't call themselves Christians. And so I kind of grappled with this for many years. And it wasn't until I started reading and noticing all these threads and doing more research on that that I just had this epiphany, Alisa.
Mhm.
My, in a not new age way, my soul left my body. And I'm like, I see it. These things are not the same. Why is nobody talking about this? Look at
Yeah.
all these ways that it's in society and in the church. I see it. I saw
Well,
it. And once
and
I saw it, it was like, this is not a video. Darn it.
yeah,
This has to be a book. And
more.
yeah, here we are.
Well, and that's the thing that for me was so eye-opening because I know I'm pretty conversational on things like the NAR, New Apostolic Reformation, the seeker-sensitive movement, progressive Christianity, of course, prosperity gospel. But what your book did was explain what they all have in common. In fact, I almost just as a fun little question, I was almost going to ask you, pick one of these. Pick NAR, seeker sensitive, prosperity gospel, progressive Christianity. Just pick one. Tell us what it is and why it's called New Thought. Because you really did do that with this deep research you did. And man, there's so many places I want to go with this interview, but maybe I'm going to start with where you've started. So it's just like you, pretty much everything I had lumped in under this banner of New Age. Like New Age is just a hodgepodge. So, but there's a difference between maybe somebody, and correct me on any of this, I'm still trying to learn this from your amazing research, but there's a difference between maybe somebody collecting crystals and thinking there's some sort of energy force that they're gleaning from that, along with like Reiki and some of these alternative things. And perhaps, some of these things are like going outside of ourself, whereas it seems like with New Thought, it's all within yourself. It's
Mhm.
like the power that you can harness that's within you. And that is perhaps why it is so malleable and can take different forms and inform different movements that
Mhm.
might have not a lot of other things in common, except it's just like the power of you. Just what are your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first, it's not necessarily NAR. I would say it's word of faith. Word of faith,
Okay.
they definitely overlap to be sure, but the specifics of the chapter that go into that are the word of faith movement, which
But don't
inevitably
you
is
quote Bill
a
Johnson in Physics of
oh
Heaven and
yeah.
all of that? Because that's
Mhm.
that's NAR, right?
Yes, and so here's the thing is that the word of faith came as a almost like an informant for anything health, wealth, prosperity. Individual apostolic and prophetic movements within like the NAR would be almost like an offshoot of word of faith is kind of the
Right.
way I
Okay,
put it.
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I had Holly Pivot read that chapter and give some feedback on it. But yeah, it was hard not to kind of go into another vein there with the NAR. But the Word of Faith movement, the inception of it, it's a straight line,
Mm.
very very straight line in that regard. But to your question, the basic okay, so this is how I would tell the basic differences between New Age and New Thought. All right, and I outline this. I think it's in chapter 2 of the book of what is this thing um or is it chapter 3, one of those. And the basically it breaks down the difference between new age and new thought. And new age, just giving a list of things that a short list of things that would be considered new age would be like tarot cards, psychic readings, crystal energies, astral projections, star seeds, the sacred geometry. There's a long list of those things. People that would be like into ancient aliens, and it's its own bucket. There's things that fit into that bucket. New thought is made to look Christian. And this is the thesis for why I wrote this book, because the new thought Christian will deceive you before the new age will. Because new age is like it's the red dude with the pitchfork and the ponytail. It's
Right.
pretty obvious to us, right? And that's why we call it out. It looks and sounds occultic. New thought looks and sounds Christian. And this is why and how it can really deceive you. Where new age is more Gnostic in origin, new thought is more, or no, new age is more Eastern mysticism in origin. New thought is more Gnostic, right? So it has these Christian underlines. People in new thought would say that they are Christian in origin, that what they teach and believe is actual true Christianity. And so to define that a little bit more, the easiest way that I would put it, and I even think I say this in the book, is you can take every Christian term in ever in the Bible, even the whole Bible itself, and you redefine it with a metaphysical Christian definition. And let me define metaphysical, because even philosophers that hear that, uh, they're confused. They're like, "What does that mean?" Because metaphysical, in a philosophical sense, just you're talking about the things you can't, simply put, the things that you can't see about God. And then for new thought, it just means that there's this supernatural, higher way of seeing whatever this is in your world, and including what's in the Bible. So, an example of this is the Christ consciousness. I define this in the book, but a new thought term that people think is new age is Christ consciousness. We hear Christ and we know what that means. We know it means Messiah, the anointed one, but not a new thought. Remember, it's beyond the physical. It's beyond what you're seeing. There's a higher meaning there. So, when Jesus is called the Christ, it's important to understand that in new thought, Jesus is a man, a person, a human being, just like you and me. That's where we can relate to him and he relates to us. But then there's this dormant inner divinity that he obtained called the Christ. He became conscious of it. He obtained the Christ. And so that's an example for us. That's what we can do too. You can obtain the Christ. You're just as much Christ as Jesus is. When he claims the I am, that's another very big New Thought word, I am affirmations. Uh, you're just as much the I am as he is, because the Christ is within. And it gets really messy and muddy, but that's the biggest way I can describe it, you know. And in a sentence, New Thought is the positive thinking movement that's in America with Jesus as its mascot.
Mm.
It's the foundation for the self-help movement. Uh, there's intertwined, company, if you will, of progressive Christianity. There's New Thought pastors that nobody realized were New Thought that have impacted our leaders and church leaders today. It's just kind of been hidden, and I'm here to change that. I want
Yeah.
people to know what this is and not to like lump it into the new age bucket. It is a different movement.
Just pressing the pause button for a moment to let you know about our first sponsor today, which is Good Ranchers, goodranchers.com. So just the other day, we have some family friends who just moved to Tennessee from a different state. They invited us over for lunch, and during lunch, my friend said to me, "Where do I find really good, high quality meat here in Tennessee?" Now, she was talking about things like grass fed beef, better than organic chicken, heritage breed pork, wild caught seafood. And I was so happy and excited to be able to say, you know what? You don't have to go anywhere but goodranchers.com and select one of their amazing boxes where you can have meat shipped to your door on dry ice, ready to put in your freezer every single month. And you know, by shopping with Good Ranchers, you're supporting local farms across the U.S. and avoiding the chaos of grocery store imports. Most importantly, you're going to enjoy stress free, delicious meals that will let you focus on what matters, and that's quality time with loved ones. And during their New Year New Meat special, you can subscribe to any box of their 100% American meat and wild caught seafood using my exclusive code Alisa. You'll get $25 off, free express shipping, and you're going to get your choice of free ground beef, chicken, or salmon in every order for an entire year. Start 2025 with better choices, better meals, and better moments at home. Go to goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa. Again, that's goodranchers.com. Yeah, and I just want to say to our audience, there is no other book like this one. You know, you might find several different versions of a basic apologetics book or something like that. Really, Melissa, what you've done is kind of some groundbreaking work, and because it really blew my mind. My mind was blown when you talked about visiting progressive Christian churches and
Yeah.
how there are New Thought churches where they'll do like pastor swaps, which I knew
Hmm.
progressive Christians do pastor swaps with Muslims and different people, but I didn't know about the New Thought pastor swaps. I do want to ask you about that in a moment, but I don't want to leave this topic just quite yet, because what you just described with Christ consciousness, any kind of loyal, longtime listener of my podcast is immediately going to be recognizing those ideas, because we talk about the work of Richard Rohr quite a bit. Now, he calls it the universal Christ. We've had Stephen Bankhurst on the podcast to talk about universal Christ. And when he was on the podcast, of course, ex-New Age guru, Stephen
Hmm.
was before he was a Christian. And he says is very much what he used to teach when he was in that world, but there's just more Bible verses put on it with Rohr. So where would you put Rohr in all of this? Like, is he more New Thought? Because I always kind of thought he was more New Age, but is it more like he's New Thought, or is he hard to pin down?
Oh, I think he's like pinning down a cloud. That man is
Mm,
like catching smoke when it comes to it. And I think that's by design,
mm-hmm,
because, and this is why I only mention him, I think I mentioned him once in my progressive chapter, because he's this mix of perennial wisdom, progressive Christianity, and definitely some new thought. But no, I would not say he's new age. I would have disagreed with myself a few years ago. I would have said, of course he's new age, because I thought that everything was underneath that umbrella. But he is definitely more in line with new thought, and that gets complicated, because then you have to go back to what's in relation to new thought as far as like a spiritual history. A lot of it goes back to this perennial wisdom
mm-hmm.
thing, and it's just this really interesting study. But he is somebody that definitely would be hard to pin down in that sense, but I do think that he has intrinsically more New Thought beliefs by far than New Age. And I would say that he is the face. What do you call him, Alisa? The
He's
Pope
the
of progressive.
progressive pope, yeah.
Yeah, and so and that's the idea. This was my trouble. I remember you and I talking about this a few years ago because I'm like, why is it when you talk, I feel like that's what I used to believe in? Why
Mhm.
right? Like, why is it that I'm reading this? And that was the problem when I was reading all those books, I'm like, why does this sound like what I believed? And I realized this vein of New Thought with everything and including progressive Christianity. I'm like, I was very progressive. I would have been progressive uh, politically. I would have been everything that they would have believed in and said. I would have been amen to because there was a level of looking at love as like the highest virtue, but a highest spiritual virtue. And the things that Richard Rohr teaches, from what I've read from him, there are things in there that I cannot divorce from New Thought. So that's my longish answer for that.
Right, and one of the things I really love about the book is that you really tie everything to your story, which I think is so helpful to help people kind of get it in their bones what it is you're trying to say, because you walk the reader through how you grew up really in New Thought with your grandmother and the books that she passed on to you that she had in her house, and so that's a really helpful part of just walking us through your seeing, becoming a Christian and kind of being led out of these ideas and then identifying them in other ways. Before we move on though, I don't want to have any roadkill of somebody going, what are they talking about with perennial wisdom? Perennial
Yeah.
wisdom, just to define it really quickly for everyone, and this is something that Richard Rohr, by the way, is very open about. It's not like we're not saying he believes in perennial wisdom. He says he does, right? And what it is a version of universalism that teaches that all religions come from and are going back to the same source, even though they keep the identities of the religions distinct. So, there we have Christian perennial wisdom, you have Buddhist perennial wisdom, and the Christian perennial wisdom person is not going to try to change anyone else's mind. They're going to try to learn what they can from the other religions that have apprehended whatever they have about God. Would you add anything, change anything to what I just said about it?
No, I think that was a really good explanation of that.
Okay. Okay, so I want to talk to you about your visits to progressive churches because this is something that I was so interested in. Part of your research was
Mhm.
actually going to different places and not just attending services, but meeting with the progressive pastors after. And one story in particular just it didn't really blow my mind because it's what we all know they think about us. But this
Mhm.
pastor said the quiet part out loud. Can you share a little bit of that story? Because I've shared this story since I read it in your book to audiences because it really helps them understand the mindset of progressive Christianity.
Yeah, this was actually my favorite part of the entire process, which some people might clutch their pearls at, like, because I get to go in and speak to these people, and I think there's something very valuable about going on and doing boots on the ground research, and I was very upfront with them. I was very, very surprised that it wasn't just going there. I would make phone calls, like, I did all this research. They weren't very curious to know why I wanted to know.
Wow.
Um, they were very open, very welcoming of anything that I asked. Nothing stumped them, and this was in New Thought churches, progressive churches. Uh, there was no topic that was off the table, and honestly, I liked that. I appreciated that because I didn't have to pull any teeth. I didn't have to be like, "Please talk to me." Nothing. And so I that is part of my research is I went to progressive churches. Now, what tipped me off to go there in the first place was very interesting because I share a lot of interviews in the book. A lot of them didn't make it in the book because space. And so I
Sure.
had to really be picky and choosy there. And so I went to a lot more places than I was able to share in the book. But it was in a New Thought center, which is a unity center, which is a New Thought denomination. And I'm in this church, I'm in the back always because, it's easier. And they give announcements at the end. And in the announcements, they're talking about these other churches that are hosting different events. One of them was a Presbyterian church that was doing a labyrinth walk, and another one was a Methodist church doing that. And, there was a lot of Presbyterian churches, a lot of Methodist churches that they mentioned, but one church in particular, he said, yeah, there's a reverend swap going on at this church, at this location, at this date. And the way that he made it sound was our new thought minister is going to trade places. And I'm like, that's weird. That's
Mhm.
really interesting. And so I didn't really think much of it until I was writing down the churches that they mentioned. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go visit these churches. And it just happened that at one of the progressive churches that I went to, that one of the pastors, when I went to go talk to the pastor afterwards, he's like, yeah, it was a new thought pastor. And he said, you might want to come back next week because we're doing a reverend swap this week. And I was just, my mind was blown. And so I did. I came back the next week and I talked to the pastor there. And it was in that conversation that I realized why they even do reverend swaps. A lot of the beliefs, and I even do this Venn diagram in the chapter to try to explain why, like what's going on here. Why do they have so many why is there so much cross contamination with beliefs? How does this happen? You have a progressive Christian and a new thoughter, and you and I, again, we've joked about this. It's like they're the same thing. It's like,
Mhm.
why are they so similar? And so I'm talking to this pastor about these things, about the beliefs, asking about specific new thought beliefs. And honestly, Alisa, like his body language was just so open and just like, yeah, give it to me. Ask me more. It was uh again, it was kind of refreshing because I felt like I could ask him anything. I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'm not going to offend you." But then I didn't offend him, but he definitely had a change of demeanor when it came to how do you say it? Like his posture changed. Like
Mhm.
his whole demeanor kind of changed when I brought up Christianity. And it wasn't just Christianity, it's what they call the fundamentalists.
Mhm.
The literalists is what he called it. Me, basically, the person sitting in front of him that I thought was so ironic because at one point he was like, they would never even walk into this church. They would never come in here to see what we have to say. And I'm like, okay, that is the most ironic thing I've run into this
Right.
year. Did
And he
not
knew
have
at
that
this
on my
point.
bingo card for this. What's that?
Right. And he knew that you
Yeah.
were conservative or whatever he would
Well,
call a fundamentalist or whatever. Just want to let you know about our second sponsor, which is 7 Weeks Coffee. In the last spot, I told you how we went over to our friend's house for lunch who had just moved here from another state. And one of the gifts I brought to them, along with a loaf of freshly baked bread, because that's my thing, I love to do that, I brought them a pound of 7 Weeks Coffee. And I loved getting to explain to them that 7 Weeks Coffee is owned by Christians. They are unapologetically pro life, and they give 10% of every order to pro life resource pregnancy centers all across the country. The coffee is not only the best coffee that you will ever taste, it's shade grown, mold free, pesticide free, organically farmed. It's also acquired through direct trade, which is higher standards than the requirements for fair trade. And because coffee tastes better with a free gift, if you subscribe now to 7 Weeks Coffee and become part of their Heartbeat Club, where you'll receive your pounds of coffee every month, you're going to get a free engraved coffee spoon plus 15% on every order. So it's the perfect way to enjoy your daily cup of 7 Weeks Coffee and support a life-saving mission at the same time. They have raised now over $750,000. That's the amount they've donated to these pro-life centers. I love 7 Weeks Coffee. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa for up to 25% off when you subscribe. And remember that your order will also directly help support a network of over 1,000 pro-life organizations across the US. So that's 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa.
see, and that's the thing is that, when I went into these interviews, I went in with a level of curiosity uh, because I needed to understand the position. I needed to make sure, okay, I'm understanding this correctly, but also asking thought-provoking questions. There was not I did not go into these interviews thinking, how am I going to get them? Like, how can I do a
Sure.
gotcha moment? It was me just thinking, okay, let me carry this out to its logical conclusion. let me ask you a question about this. And the frustrating thing is that when I would ask a question about, oh, that's right, I was asking him about the fundamental Christian position. And I asked him basically, well, what if they're right, in essence, about these topics? Would you then believe what they believe? And he was like, never. I would never believe that. And it was because his logic was a lot like the other logic. This is why I used his interview, because it matched up so well with other interviews that I had done. People are, it's not that they disagree with Christianity. What I found in my research is they were disgusted with
Mm,
Christianity.
yeah.
They were just like that's what I mean, like his demeanor changed. He's like, ugh. Like
Yeah.
that's like the best way I can put it when I was talking to him. It went from a yeah, ask me questions. I'm on this. Ugh, kind of thing. And that's just kind of what I got from it. And um, I told him that I'm like, well, I tend to think that they have a point with certain things. What do you think about that? And that's where it got brought up with, okay, well, what if it's objectively true? And then we got into truth. We got into like a whole truth conversation. And the thing with him is that it can't be true if it's not loving. And so you define everything through this lens of love, especially scripture. So if he comes across something in scripture that's offensive or unloving, you have to redefine it with what resonates through the eyes of love. So there was so much with that conversation, and I remember him, and he was very nice, he was very kind, and I think that there's something to be said about crossing those lines in a healthy way and having these conversations with them, not just for the sake of having a conversation, but for understanding their position. But also, I don't think that he had grappled with some of the topics I brought up, and I was surprised about that. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
you're this great thinker,
Right.
you're so open-minded and tolerant, but you would not even entertain the thought that you're wrong. He did
Mhm.
not care.
Yeah. No,
He
I
just did
remember that
not
was
care.
so, stunning about that story, and if I might be conflating this with another story, but was this the same guy where he was talking about how inclusive and tolerant and accepting and welcoming they are, and then you mentioned more fundamentalist or conservative Christians, and that's when he kind of bristled back like, "Well, no, they're," and didn't he call them the bad guys, or am I
Oh,
remembering
yeah.
that right?
Yes, and so, yeah, to bring that home full circle, whenever I was talking about, Christian fundamentalists, these bad, yucky words, ugh, he's like, "Oh, no, they're the bad guys." Yes. That is the exact word he used.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, like, they're disgusted with the position. It's not just a general disagreement. You're the enemy.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really important to at least understand, but it explained to me why there was such a resistance to even want to understand the other position. And don't you think that's ironic though, Elisa, is that if you have a position that's all tolerant and so inclusive and open-minded, but you don't even want to cross that line to understand the other position of the bad guys, because for the sake of the argument that they are the bad guys, you don't want them to be correct because there's consequences if they are. And that's totally uh, the feel that I got, is that
Mhm.
the consequences if they're correct is that there's this angry vengeance, angry God, filled with vengeance and hate. And love as he would know it doesn't exist in the form that he knows it. And I'm nodding my head. I'm like, yes and no.
Mhm.
It's like, no, where did you get that idea of God? Tell me. How did you do that? How did you grow up? Tell me where did that information come from? And
Right.
understanding his lens was important. A lot of the people I talked to, actually all of them, if I went back and looked at my notes, when I'm asking, "How did you come to believe what you did?" A lot of it was hurt,
Mhm.
whether it was in the church or personally, trauma as a
It's
child.
like
Uh
deconstruction almost.
Mhm, yeah, and so there's this level of looking at these beliefs with a sense of, "Oh, this is healing for me. This gives me more control. If I believe this over here, this is gonna cause me to give up my control. This is harmful to me." And so, yes, that's in essence the exact word he used, and he used it more than a few times with some colorful language that I did not add.
Yeah.
But in essence, yes, that is the word he used, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the incuriosity about other beliefs and sort of how surprised you kind of were at how little he really understood about how he came to certain conclusions or what other people might be saying, because this is my experience too, as I've encountered the movement of progressive Christianity for years. I mean, I spent years listening to all of their podcasts, reading their books. I still read their books.
Mhm.
And yet the main charge is like, "Oh, you don't understand it." But then what you don't see, you see lots of people in our world, like you and me, David Walcott, several others, I mean, constantly reading their books, engaging with their material, trying to understand it, commenting on it, reviewing it. And you don't tend to see that from the other side. Now, not saying that that represents everybody, because there really are some theologically sophisticated progressive Christians out there for sure, and a few
Mhm.
that have read my book and reviewed it, and I can appreciate that. But for the most part, though, it's not like they're out there going, "Ooh, let's figure out what the next fundamentalist book is, so that we can really understand our differences." They're not doing that. And whereas
Yeah.
I see a lot of people in our world doing that. Now that's just anecdotal, but I think that bears out in what you're talking about. And I wanted to ask you, there was one story you told that I actually got kind of emotional when I was
Mm.
reading it. And it really, I didn't think anything in progressive Christianity would surprise me, but this actually did surprise me.
Hmm.
And maybe you can give some insight into this, but it was the story where you had visited, I can't remember if it was a New Thought or a progressive Christian church, but you asked the minister if she
Mm.
had heard of the serpent's lie, and she didn't even know what you were talking about.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
that blew
That
my
was at a
mind.
Unity Center. That was at a New Thought Center.
And this is something
And
that's parading itself as Christian.
mhm.
And I mean, you would think just even your average secular person would know what you're talking about. Tell a little bit about that, because what you said to her was profound. And it
Yeah.
seems like maybe you put a little pebble in her shoe and she'll think about it. One of the most common questions that I receive everywhere I go is from Christian parents wanting to know how they can equip their kids to have a biblical worldview and to really understand the Bible. And the number one recommendation that I always have is Foundation Worldview Curriculum. They have a specific curriculum called Studying the Bible. And this solves a couple of problems. If you're like me, you want your kids to have a biblical worldview. You want to teach them what the Bible says and what it means. We plan lessons, we teach them. But one of the things we can fail to do is to give them the skills they're going to need to be able to read, interpret, study the Bible for themselves for the rest of their lives. And so, this Studying the Bible curriculum from Foundation Worldview solves that problem by giving you 10 lessons and helping kids grasp the major periods in Bible history, getting the big picture of things. Then there's 10 lessons focused on basic Bible study skills like learning context, 10 lessons exploring how to correctly read the different genres. And these materials set kids on the trajectory of seeking God through his word all their lives. And you know what? We're going to learn a lot as we go along with it with our kids. So go to foundationworldview.com and you can use my code Alisa to get 10% off of any family license, not just on the Studying the Bible one, but any of the ones they offer. Again, foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa.
That's why I saved her for the last, because out of everybody I talked to, she was different. She was very different, and, I hadn't even heard of the serpent's lie, like, as a Christian. Going to church,
Hmm.
volunteering in church, being involved in a Christian church. I'd never even heard that term, what it was, what it stood for, and so that knocked me off my seat, but I also it didn't really phase too many people. There was one woman who said, "Oh, that sounds like truth to me." I remember adding what she said in there, it's like, "Oh, no, what he said was true," which is an element of Gnosticism. But this woman, I remember it was after service, and I still see her in my head right now, like how she looked, her face, everything, and we're just casually talking. She's just one of the many interviews I had and people to talk to. But her demeanor was very different. Maybe there's nobody else around. It was just me and her in the back of this room, and I'm just asking her questions, and the way that she's answering me was very kind, very soft, but her answers were different than the others on many levels. and not in some others. But when I asked her, hey, have you ever heard of the serpent's lie? And I remember her thinking, she's like, why don't you remind me of it? Kind of thing. I'm like, all right, well, the oldest lie told to humanity is from Genesis 3, where the serpent in the garden tells Eve, hey, you can be like God. Like, did God really say? And there's this constant effort from humanity to be elevated to divinity. And God is saying that and I'm paraphrasing our conversation, because there's only so much you could add, which is nice to like talk about it and add more. But basically, that humanity is striving to be like God, but there's a beautiful divide there, that there is something outside of ourselves that we can go to and look to. There is a God, a personal God that you can rely on, that's not within. And she paused and she looks at me and she kind of stares at me for a second, and she's like, I've never heard of that before. This is new to me. And what came from that conversation was a really organic back and forth of me appealing to her that there's something better. But then we got to the end of our conversation, and I was telling her, because we had to go, and I remember kind of reaching out to her, like across the table, if you will. Like, I don't pretend to know what you've been through, but I want you to know that Jesus of scripture, and she knew what I was talking about. She knew what I meant. That as the scripture tells him to be, is what you're looking for. And in essence, I asked her, well, do you believe this? And then right away, she's like, I won't believe that. And it was like what the progressive was saying, is that you become a bad guy.
Mhm.
If you cross that line and you go, there's a cost.
Yeah.
And Jesus says to count that cost. Are you willing, for the sake of Jesus, to look like him when he carried that cross up the hill?
Yeah.
He looked like a bad guy.
That's right.
They killed him, right? Like, he didn't look like the good guy. And I think that's a big struggle for them, is that a lot of it is the pleasing of man with the
Mhm.
guise of thinking you're pleasing God. And there was something very raw in that conversation, though. And I think about her often and wonder, like, okay, what happened in that conversation? What made her open to at least consider? And I wonder if she had a stone in her shoe, and that the Holy Spirit can't grow that. But I do think that there was a seed planted in that conversation, which is why I saved it for the end.
And I felt that. That's why I think I got a little bit emotional because it was your tone in describing it was so merciful and so loving.
Mm,
And it sounds like the conversation you had was potentially really fruitful. So that was a very moving part of the book.
mhm,
And this is also all over. We're going to pivot a little bit here, but it's all over the
mhm,
self-help industry.
mhm, mhm.
Both what would be marketed as Christian and as secular. And I'm guessing, I can't remember if you addressed this in the book or not, but I would take a huge guess to say this is all over the biblical counseling world. Have you done much investigation with that?
That's so funny. Just before this interview, I actually had a phone call with a friend who's in biblical counseling asking for counsel. Ironic. That sentence was weird. But yeah, because there are certain things that she's like, Is this what I think it is? And so every single chapter, when it came to affirmations, law of attraction, self help, every chapter needed some sort of nuance in this regard, because you're talking about a movement that is so intertwined in the very fabric of America and even in the churches, that what most people come back with is, but this helps me. But
Right.
this thing, whatever this is, I know it may not be biblical. It's not really unbiblical either. Helped me. And so what do you do with that? Like, how do you hash out somebody that's never been a positive thinker, right? Let's say that they're a chronically negative thinker and they need help figuring out how to think better. A lot of people that have read this book or even are familiar with new thought techniques think, what's the difference between new thought and positive thinking? Like, you have even toxic positivity, but even new thought wouldn't say that what they're doing is toxic, right? And so there needs to be this nuance, I think, with all of these things. And what I've come up with is if it's tethered to reality, it's easier to sift out the garbage, right? So I mean, affirmations, for example, if you're taking that, which by the way are New Thought prayers.
Mm.
New Thought spearheaded what affirmations are. I am statements, like Joel Osteen.
Yeah.
um,
Like, give us some
which-
examples of those, though, because I want to help people recognize it.
yeah.
So, like, what would an I am statement look like? I have always cared about the quality of products that I put in and on my body. But especially in the last year or two, I've become a lot more careful about making sure that the products I use don't contain toxins and harsh chemicals. So I discovered Adele Natural Cosmetics, and I've been using their products for a while now, and I absolutely love them. It's hard to pick a favorite. I love all of the items in their essential skincare kit. I use a lot of their makeup, their foundation, their bronzer, blush, eyeshadows. I love it all. And I love that they're Christians. I love that they're family run, holistic, and that their products are handcrafted and toxin free. So they started because their owner had a health crisis in 1999, and she discovered that finding natural products can be kind of confusing. And so she figured out that the only way to get trusted products were just to take matters in her own hands and make them herself. So they handcraft, artisan make their cosmetics in small batches without the use of parabens, synthetic fragrances, nanoparticles, petroleum based products, or anything else on an ingredient list that is difficult to pronounce. And because they search for high quality, nutrient dense ingredients, customers have found that their products have helped to reduce inflammatory conditions like acne and redness. It calms eczema, and they're just such good, high quality products. Now, while the Adele team is incredibly passionate about natural cosmetics, their hope is that in a world that is so self-focused, that we are all reminded that true beauty comes from the heart. So I want you to check them out. Go to AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. That's spelled ADEL. Try something out, see what you think. Use my code Alisa for a discount. Again, that's AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. Use my code Alisa.
An I am statement as far as a New Thought
Mm-hmm.
affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
I am whole. I am enough. I am plenty. I am wealthy. I am healthy. I am wise. I am. Now, the what I'm telling people when you're saying affirmations and you're looking at yourself in the mirror, what is your motivation and what is your intention in doing that? Because when we are doing capital I am statements, that means something very, very directly in New Thought. You are, in essence, invoking your inner divinity. You are, in essence, invoking a prayer to yourself to create that reality. You are saying, I am abundant. I am healthy. I'm not down in the dumps. I'm up here with God. I'm victorious, right? It's
Mm,
like you're trying to lift this up to this level because you are this being that has power. And what you think and what you speak creates your reality. This is all New Thought. A lot of people watching might think, oh, this is like, I've seen this in churches. Yeah, that's the point.
yeah,
Like that's my
right.
point. Is the genesis for these beliefs is not the Bible. I want to give people an understanding of where this came from. So if you're saying an I am statement, the idea is that in New Thought, you are aligning yourself with that energy to manifest in your reality. If you don't feel whole, don't say I'm not whole. If you're not healthy, you can't say that. I am healthy.
I mean,
I am healed.
this sounds just like Word of Faith, which is
Yes,
the
and there's
point
a
you
whole
make in the
chapter on
book.
that one. Yes.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest, straightest line. That one, yeah, not to segue into another topic, but that what really took me a while to figure out too, because I got out of these teachings in 2011. That was the first thing I saw. I'm like, why? Same scriptures, same words, same uh, methods, exactly the same way in these churches. And I'm thinking, I just left these beliefs. What's the connection? What happened here? And by the way, I think it's important to know that I was in New Thought, even New Age stuff. There's always some overlap without realizing there was a name to it. I didn't realize there was a name to all of these things. I just thought it was Christianity.
Mm,
And so when I left, I'm like, this, okay, this is what this is. This is now, as I understand it, way more new thought beliefs. But why is it in the church? What's happening here? So I have a whole chapter connecting prosperity and health to new thought, the genesis of new thought. And the basic way I'll put it is that if you were to take the mind cure movement of the 1800s, Pentecostalism, primarily as it was in the 1800s, like with Kenneth Hagin and Kenneth Copeland in the beginning, and the beginnings of all of these revivals that were going on in Pentecostalism, uh, and New Thought, if you mix those together and you created a baby, it would be the Word of Faith movement. And that, for me, that was the smoking gun. I figured it out. I'm like, man, I see it. I understand how this happened, and I trace that lineage, if you will, back to the how that cross contamination happened. Because you cannot deny. I look at Joel Osteen, and I see a unity minister.
Mhm.
And it's so clear to me how those are new thought things he's saying from the stage. How did that happen? So I delve into that, and I try to, dot those I's and cross those T's for people.
Yeah, and you do a great job. What are some other buzzwords? Like if somebody's got a book that may be helping them and they're a little confused, like, hey, I have some red flags, I'm not sure what to look for. What might be some phrases they would look for, maybe buzzwords? I know we talked about I am statements, affirmations. What else would there be just to not necessarily to make them go, oh, this is new thought, but maybe to raise that red flag and go, okay, let me look into this a little more.
Yeah, so the biggest thing I think I would tell people to look for are how is this resource or this book or this teacher or leader, what are they talking about as far as my mindset? Am I allowed to think or say anything negative or critical or anything like that? So mindset is a huge buzzword. If you're reading something and it's talking about how to change your mindset to a positive mindset, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but I'm like, oh, okay, let's look into this more. Um, Another one is manifestation, visualization. Isolated, these things don't mean much, but I'm saying that as a whole, you can take these things and think, okay, these are common buzzwords that I'm seeing here. Vibrations, frequency. I know I only mentioned her by name once, but a controversial figure that maybe some people may be surprised to hear is pretty new thought in her beliefs is Caroline Leaf. And she's talking about, vibrations and frequencies, in your brain and your mind and how that affects your reality around you. So uh, things like that. When it's talking about mind power, your words having power, visualization, manifestation, things like that. And those are affirmations, of course, but those are just some of the buzzwords that come immediately to my mind. Abundance, prosperity, a lot of them overlap into word of faith terms about especially about prosperity and health and wealth and abundance and things like that. The fact is, and then the other thing is how do they depict God? Who is this God? Is this God a God that can't tell you no if you have enough faith? Can you create and retain your reality? Ask, seek, believe. And that's the hard part, is that they'll take scriptures and put them into this content and put it out there into their speeches and in their books. And they'll say, yes, look, Jesus did this too. You ask God and you believe it, it's out there, guys. Don't have any doubt. And what ends up happening is there's this a hesitation to think critically, because critical thinking is seen as negative thinking. So all that to say, pay attention to the mindsets, pay attention to those terms, and hopefully that'll give you some sort of, check to look
Mhm.
a little bit further into that author or speaker.
That's really helpful. I just looked up Caroline Leaf because I hadn't heard
Mm.
her name before. And just on Facebook, she's got almost 500,000 followers. And the whole branding of this looks very sciency, right? And
Yes.
that's one thing you point out in the book too, is that often this is really kind of living under a sort of, we're doing science and it's really more pseudoscience, but people need to be aware that you might be thinking you're just following some scientific evidence, but a lot of times it's kind of a pseudoscience approach and it's not reliable, but it really is new thought.
That's important too. I'm glad you brought that up because the other thing that really taunted me and tricked me into New Thought was that it looked like they love to use quantum physics and quantum mechanics and these scientific terms. That's really important to watch out too. They like to use these terms to show you the power of your mind. It all comes back to that. Like, that's why it's called a new way of thinking. It's new thought and it's in your mind. All the power is up here. And some of it is good. Some of it is true and helpful. And other parts of it are odd, but very convincing, especially if you're saying, oh, this is scientific. Your brain waves can affect the vibrations around you and the frequencies of the earth, and it's unseen of what you can bring into your world, into your reality. Oh, and here's some science behind that. It's it can be convincing for some people.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to run out of time before we go down one little rabbit trail here that I want to go down with you. So
Fun.
back when I was in Zoe Girl, couple of times they booked us in to sing at this church called Crystal Cathedral with Robert Schuller.
Oh,
And fast forward to when I was in the progressive church that I wrote another gospel about. And the pastor that I wrote about in my book was a huge Schuller fan, loved Robert Schuller, just really so. And then you connected the dots for me because obviously I could tell Robert Schuller was progressive, but I didn't realize that really he's probably more new thought than anything else.
100%.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, somewhere on the internet, I haven't been able to find it, but like, there's a picture of us with Robert Schuller. Yeah.
I'm
I can't,
clutching my pearls.
I know. I want to find it. I can't, I've looked for it and I can't find it, but we did. We took press photos with him. But, yeah, so I believe we went twice and sang. Of course, I had no idea back then what he was preaching or any of that. I just, it's just a booking. But
Mhm.
I would love for you to give us a little history because it's so for me, it was so eye-opening to know the history of Schuller and how that flowered out into the whole seeker-sensitive movement and even, gave us people like Joel Osteen and others.
Yes, this was the most complicated chapter to write because, it was personal, but it was also with an understanding that a lot of Christians go to seeker churches, and there's these things about seeker churches that are intrinsically good, but there's also this dark history.
Mhm.
I consider it kind of dark because I when I found this out, I don't even know how I stumbled upon this, but I grew up watching Robert Schuller. He was the positive thinking reverend. And Crystal Cathedral, I remember him in his robes, all the things. And I found out and discovered that Robert Schuller is a major player, if not the number one father, if you will, of the seeker. I call it the seeker centered movement. Because again, nuance that. I think that it's good when a church is seeker sensitive because they're sensitive to the fact that there's seekers in the audience. That, hey, maybe explain what this term means a little bit, or maybe use a different term. But
Sure.
the pastor understands that the Sunday service is made for the Christian. And so there's wisdom there and discernment with your sermon. And then you have the other side, which is seeker centered, which is the entire church pivots towards impressing the unchurched. Okay. Now, Robert Schuller, again, there's always more in the book, but he actually had a very orthodox beginning. He was I think he was a Presbyterian minister. He started out reformed, and he was giving his sermons, and a lot of people would complain that they were dry and overly theological. And what he ended up doing, and I'm simplifying his story, but what he ended up doing is he went door to door asking people, "Hey, do you go to church?" And if they said yes, he'd say, "Great." Didn't matter where they went, by the way. Didn't matter where they went. He'd say, "Yes, great. Keep on going." And then if they didn't, he would say, "Well, why don't you go to church?" "Well, it's boring. I don't like all the negative stuff. I don't like hell. I don't like the wrath, too many crosses. It's not comfortable, whatever it is. I can't wear jeans," whatever it was. And so he gathered this information and he He made a way for people to feel like they could go to church and have a different experience. Okay. And honestly, some of that isn't bad. I mean, I think that modernizing certain things in the church, go play your guitar, right? Like enjoy your drums. Zoe girl, you're welcome to go and perform. You know, it's like there's certain things that I think are fine and good for contextualization, but then the line gets crossed into secretism, and where's that line? Robert Schuller, what makes him very different is that his influences were not the Bible. It wasn't just this, oh, I'm going to make my church inviting. What informed his decision to do this was he was influenced heavily by Norman Vincent Peale, who is a New Thought minister, and others as well. Dale Carnegie was another. Dale Carnegie's book is still a bestseller down at your local bookstore. I mean, you're talking New Thought authors that still have an influence on people today. But Norman Vincent Peale was especially influential on a lot of people, uh, even powerful people today. And Robert Schuller was one of them. And so he enmeshed his beliefs and kind of pivoted towards these new thought ways of preaching, positive preaching, impress the unchurched, take down anything offensive, speak positively. I'm staring at his book right now, and it's called the Self-Esteem Reformation. It's all about the self. It's reforming your sermons on how to help your self-esteem. How can
Mm,
you meet their felt needs? And you have these Bible verses that are taken in, and their life applications basically on how you can take these biblical principles and in essence make it about how that applies to you. And he also had a leadership institution, okay? And in this leadership institution, he mentored men and basically handed the baton over, and they went out and they took it out and marketed it. Two of those men were Bill Hybels and Rick Warren. I'm not suggesting that they adopted his beliefs. I am saying that they demonstrably adopted his methods for growing a church. And so the questions that I ask in this chapter are, how much can we divorce methods from theology? What methods, what do our methods, what effect does that have on your theology? What are these issues that come up in seeker churches? Uh, like the divide between the pastor and the congregants, and the money, you know, like the how does this happen? And what's the goal here? And I also try to be nuanced and fair, because a lot of seeker churches, they're very gospel oriented, but they're not disciple, like they don't look at discipleship as a sense of as a main focus a lot of times. And so I talk about this. I talk about the, hey, here's the origin, and what do we do about this as time has gone on? Because there are issues here. We need to talk about those issues and have these hard questions, while at the same time understanding that there's also seeker churches that they do. A lot of people have heard the gospel for the first time in a seeker church, whether it's the music, whether it's a sermon.
mhm.
Uh, my argument is, then what? Right. And so, yeah, it's a very nuanced chapter, but that is the shortish story of Robert Schuller and how he has affected everything about how we do church today.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's nuanced, but it's also very accessible. It's not hard to understand. It's not like overly academic. So I just really want to encourage everybody to get the book. So, Melissa, where can people connect with you online? You've got a very successful YouTube channel. Tell us all the things and where they can pre-order the book.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, of course, YouTube. The book, you can get it wherever books are sold, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Audible, wherever, whatever strikes your fancy. But yeah, basically wherever you get your books.
Okay, and I want to thank you so much. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to say just as we close out here?
No, I think that was good. I enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. All right. Well, I want to thank my guest, Melissa Dougherty. Definitely pick up her book, Happy Lies. So, so good. It's a real game changer. It was a huge eye opener for me. Also, please share this with anyone that you think it might help, and subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. And if you're listening on audio platforms, it helps us out so much to join the other thousands of people who have left great reviews for us. It helps fine-tune that algorithm, get this message out to more people. And let's remember that as we pursue Christ, to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.